The summer of 1974 smelled like exhaust and burnt asphalts, and Dale Mercer had been standing on the shoulder of Route 40 for going on 3 hours when the Peterbilt finally slowed. He'd had his thumb out since Flagstaff, cardboard sign long since disintegrated in the afternoon heat, the ink bleeding down into nothing. His duffel bag sat at his feet like a faithful old dog, tan canvas, busted zipper, everything he owned inside it. He was 23 years old, broke, and the sun was doing something mean to the back of his neck. The truck groaned and wheezed as it pulled into the gravel shoulder of the Sundowner Gas and Fuel, a flat little building that looked like it had grown out of the desert floor. Tumbleweeds pressed against the chain-link fence behind the pumps. A plastic sign in the window advertised RC Cola for 35 cents. Dale grabbed his bag and jogged toward the cab before the driver could change his mind. The man who pushed open the passenger door was maybe 55, with a face like old saddle leather and white hair gone yellowish at the temples. He wore a short-sleeve Western shirt with pearl snaps, and when he reached over to clear the seat of a paper bag and a Thomas guide, Dale saw a tattoo on his forearm, a faded anchor, the kind the Navy handed out to kids who were too young to know what they were signing.
"Where you headed?"
the man said. "East," Dale said. "Far as you'll take me." The driver looked him over. It was a slow, practiced look, the kind that measured a man without seeming to. Whatever he found must have satisfied him because he tipped his chin toward the seat. "Name's Roy," he said. "Dale." "All right, Dale. I'm stopping to fuel up and get something cold to drink, then I'm rolling. You want anything inside? You got about 4 minutes." Dale bought a Coke and a bag of peanuts and was back in the cab by the time Roy finished at the pump. The truck was a '71 Peterbilt 351, cherry red with chrome stacks, and it pulled a white refrigerated trailer with no markings on the side, no company name, no DOT number that Dale could see, though he only glanced. He wasn't the nosy type. You learned fast, hitchhiking, that asking too many questions was a good way to find yourself back on the shoulder of the road. Roy hauled himself up into the cab with the grunt of a man whose knees had logged too many miles, and they rolled back onto Route 40 eastbound as the sun began its slow drop toward the mesas. "What are you hauling?" Dale asked, mostly for something to say. Roy shrugged one shoulder. "Contract load. Medical supply company out of Phoenix. Paid me decent to run it to Albuquerque, didn't ask too many questions, and neither did I." He cracked his window and lit a Pall Mall. "That's the way I like my work." Dale nodded like that made all the sense in the world. It probably did. He'd worked enough cash under the table jobs himself, loading trucks, picking citrus, one miserable winter in a cannery outside of Stockton, to understand that the men who wrote the checks didn't always feel obliged to explain themselves. "You do this run a lot?" Dale asked. "First time with this company," Roy said. "Dispatcher called me at the yard, said their regular driver was out sick. Good rate per mile, fuel covered." He tapped ash out the cracked window. "Refrigerated hull," they said. "Keep it running, don't open the back." Dale looked over. "Don't open the back? Contents are temperature sensitive." Roy said it like he was reading from a script. "That's what the fella told me. Some kind of biological samples, lab equipment, I don't know. Medical stuff. I didn't ask." The desert went purple and then black around them. Roy ran a CB radio that mostly produced static and the occasional trucker complaining about a speed trap outside of Gallup. They talked in the easy, shapeless way that strangers do when they're tired and have miles to burn. Roy had a daughter in Tucson he didn't see enough. Dale had a mother in Memphis he was working his way back toward. Roy had driven trucks for 28 years. Dale had been moving since he was 19 and couldn't quite explain why. Around 9 o'clock, somewhere west of Gallup, Roy noticed the temperature gauge on the refrigeration unit. It was mounted on the dash, a secondary instrument the cargo company had apparently rigged to monitor the trailer's internal temperature. Dale had assumed it was just another piece of truck hardware, but Roy's eyes kept going to it, and his expression had been slowly rearranging itself for the last 20 minutes. "Something wrong?" Dale asked. "Gauge keeps dropping," Roy said. "Refrigeration unit's supposed to hold at 38 degrees. It's reading 52 now. 53? He tapped the gauge with one thick finger. Could be the gauge, could be the unit cycling off. Does that matter for medical supplies? Could matter a lot depending on what it is. Roy drummed his fingers on the wheel. "I'm not supposed to open the back." "Yeah," Dale said. They rode in silence for a mile. "But if it's pharmaceuticals," Roy said, "or blood product, some of that stuff goes bad fast." If I deliver a spoiled load, that's on me, that's my reputation. The gauge read 55 degrees. There's a rest stop about 8 miles up, Roy said quietly. I'm going to pull in and take a look. The rest stop was a lonely thing, 2 concrete picnic tables, a brick bathroom block with a single buzzing fluorescent over the door, and a turnaround loop cracked by years of desert freeze and thaw. At this hour it was empty. Roy pulled the Peterbilt around and killed the engine, and the quiet that followed was enormous. They climbed down from the cab. The night air was cool and smelled like sage and distance. Dale followed Roy around to the rear of the trailer, his sneakers crunching on the gravel, hands in his jacket pockets. The trailer was long and white and featureless, and up close it seemed bigger somehow, the way things do in the dark. Roy pulled out a small flashlight and clicked it on, aiming the beam at the rear doors. There was a standard latch bar and handle, and a padlock through the hasp, but the padlock was hanging open, the shackle not seated. He frowned at it and looked at Dale. "That's not how I left Phoenix," he said. "What do you mean?" "I mean, when I took the load, the dock supervisor locked that himself. I watched him." Roy turned the padlock over in his hand, the flashlight beam trembling slightly against the white trailer door. "This has been opened." The two men looked at each other. Dale felt something move in his chest, a slow, cold settling, like ice forming over still water. "Could have been a way station," Dale said. "Inspector might have—" "Way station checks the cab, the manifest. They don't open refrigerated loads." Roy set the open padlock down on the bumper. It made a small, hollow sound against the metal. Not without a reason. He grabbed the latch bar. It turned with a heavy clunk, and Roy pulled the right door open. The smell hit them first. Not rot, not decay, not yet. It was something more human than that, and somehow worse. Sweat and breath and fear, the smell of warm bodies in a cold enclosed space. A smell that Dale recognized from a county jail holding cell he'd spent one night in outside of Barstow. 6 men in a room meant for 2. Roy raised the flashlight. The beam swept the interior of the trailer, and Dale heard the man make a sound he'd never heard come out of another person. A short, choked syllable, not quite a word. There were people inside. They were pressed together against the far wall, some sitting, some slumped, 3 or 4 lying on the corrugated metal floor. Dale counted fast and stopped counting at 12. Men, women, 2 children, a little girl and a boy maybe 9 or 10 years old. They were dark-haired, brown-skinned, dressed in the practical clothing of people who had planned to travel, denim and cotton, a woman in a yellow blouse with embroidery at the collar. Several of them had their arms around each other. The little girl was awake, and she was looking directly at Dale, and her eyes were very large and very dark and completely dry, the way eyes get past the point of tears. A man near the front, heavy-set, maybe 40, wearing a flannel shirt, raised one hand slowly. His lips moved, but no sound came out, not right away. Roy stepped up into the trailer without a word. He crouched beside the nearest person, an older woman, and touched her face gently, and she flinched, and then she didn't flinch anymore. Roy said something low that Dale couldn't hear. The woman looked at Roy's face for a long moment, and then her shoulders dropped, and she began to cry with the terrible exhausted relief of someone who had been bracing for something much worse. Dale stood at the rear doors and couldn't move. Roy climbed back out. His face had gone to stone, the way men's faces do when they are very angry and have decided that anger can wait for later. "Get the water," he said. His voice was flat and even. "Left side of the cab, back of the bunk, there's a case of water. And there's a bag with road food, crackers, whatever I've got. Bring all of it." Dale was already moving. He went to the cab at a dead run, found the water, grabbed it and the bag off the bunk, and was back in 90 seconds. Roy was inside the trailer again, talking to the heavy-set man in the flannel shirt, who apparently spoke some English, gesturing slowly and clearly. They distributed the water. Dale crouched in front of the little girl, who still hadn't looked away from him, and held out a bottle. She looked at it, then at him. Then she took it and pressed it to her chest like it was something precious before she opened it and drank. Roy came and stood beside Dale at the rear of the trailer, watching the people inside settle. The sound of quiet voices, water being passed hand to hand, a child whimpering softly before going still. "I'm going to get on the CB, Roy said. "Yeah," Dale said. Roy didn't move yet. He stood there with his flashlight aimed at the gravel, the beam catching the dust around their feet. "I don't know who set this up, I don't know who those people are that hired me. He said it without looking at Dale. But I drove them across a desert in a locked box, and I didn't know. Dale didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. Go turn on the hazards, Roy said. I'll be there in a minute. Dale climbed into the cab and hit the hazard switch, and the amber pulse began its slow, steady sweep out into the empty road. Both directions, nothing but black desert and stars as far as he could see. He picked up the CB handset. His hand was steady, which surprised him. He gave the mile marker, gave the location, said there was an emergency, said it clearly, said it twice. Then he set the handset down and looked out through the windshield. Roy was still standing at the rear of the trailer. He hadn't moved toward the cab. He was just standing there at the edge of the light spilling out from inside, and from this distance, in the dark, Dale couldn't read his face, couldn't tell what the man was thinking, couldn't tell what he was looking at exactly, the people inside, or something past them, or something he was working out quietly in his own mind. Dale looked down at the CB radio. The channel was open, carrying static and the far-off murmur of other trucks on other roads, moving through other dark stretches of desert. Men who didn't know yet what was happening out here at mile marker 47. Men who might never know. He looked back out the windshield. Roy hadn't moved. The hazard lights kept pulsing, out and out and out into the dark. That slow amber beat, like a signal to something Dale couldn't name. He waited for headlights to appear on the horizon. He waited for the sound of tires on asphalt, a siren, anything. None came. And then, from somewhere behind the trailer, from somewhere out in the dark beyond the reach of any lights, Dale heard a sound. Not the wind, not an animal, a door. A vehicle door, opening and closing softly, like someone was trying not to be heard. Dale sat up straight. His eyes went to the side mirror. The mirror showed him the road behind the truck, a long silver ribbon of asphalt disappearing into blackness. No headlights, no vehicle that he could see, just the dark, and the desert, and the shapes at the edge of the lights that could have been anything. He looked for Roy. Roy was gone. The rear of the trailer stood open, the light still spilling out onto the gravel, the people inside still moving, still quiet, still unaware. But Roy was not there. The spot where he'd been standing was empty. Just gravel and darkness, and the amber pulse of the hazard lights sweeping over nothing. Dale's hand found the door handle. We didn't open it, not yet. He sat very still in the cab of a dead man's truck on a road that nobody was coming down, and he listened to the static on the CB and the sound of his own breathing, and he waited to hear that door again. The desert didn't answer. It never does.